Happy Friday. Thank you so much for being here today. If you are on the outskirts of the room, I would love to invite you to move in just to kind of pull in, we don't bite. And the other thing that I'm going to do, I was doing my best with this as you all came in. I was checking you off on my list, but I'm just going to send around my attendance sheet. If you see your name on there and there isn't a check mark, please mark it. There's room to put your name down if you didn't sign up ahead of time. We'll probably have a couple folks coming in at the last minute too. Okay. Well, hello everyone. I've met a lot of you, but in case I haven't, my name is Leah Zickmund. I'm the executive director here at Hourglass. I'm so grateful to have you all here today. It's a beautiful day outside, so hopefully you have plans to get outside and enjoy the weekend. Today we're talking about media literacy in education. Media literacy is a big topic. It can go into many different directions. It's also a topic we might feel concerned about, but struggle to recognize our role in. In this digital era where news can spread quickly, misinformation can spread even faster, and artificial intelligence moves at lightning speed, it can feel like keeping up and knowing the right thing to do is time-consuming and where to begin. But media literacy impacts a lot of our decision-making, how we think, how we vote, and where we put our time and money. Luckily, we have some educators here today from Lancaster County who are excited to talk about how they discuss media literacy with their students. Perhaps you'll learn something from them to apply to your own world too. Today, we'll hear from our three panelists. First, Charlie Reisinger, a veteran leader in school technology and CIO at Penn Manor, an adjunct professor at Millersville University. For this conversation, he pulled in some of his colleagues at Millersville to deepen the conversation, including Stacey Irwin, professor of media arts production at Millersville, and Robert Spicer, associate professor of communication at Millersville. Robert is also a freelance journalist who writes for LNP. For today's program, we'll hear brief 10-minute presentations from each of our three speakers and then invite you all to ask questions to them as a panel. Before we dive in, I want to thank our forum sponsors, Rogers & Associates, the Ware Center, and Shoemaker for our live streaming service, and Caleb Borman for our event photography today. Let's give our speakers a round of applause, and I'll invite Charlie to start.
All right, thank you, Leah. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? Great, all right. So let's dive into a really complicated topic. So media literacy. Boy, I have the honor of kicking this off and trying to put together all of this information into just a short introduction to give you a sense as to what we're doing at Penn Manor School District. As you already know, the world has changed dramatically, right? From just a couple years ago, but if you think back to 40 years ago, media was a lot simpler, right? So for those of us that may or may not have graduated around this time, not implying anything, right? Not implying anything or calling out anybody's age. If you think back to the old world of media, there truly was only a few sources, a few curated sources of media, right? So call it the good old days, call it the bad old days, but if you wanted to find out what was going on in the world, right, you went to a local newspaper, maybe you had access to a regional or a national newspaper. The TV had few channels, some of them were not even on past midnight. And social media or social sites at the time were the telephone, right, that was likely attached to the wall, right? So you couldn't go very far, you couldn't roam, you couldn't take the phone with you. Well, obviously that's changed, right? You know, we know about that. And the complexion of media has changed fundamentally. So when we talk about media literacy, I don't want to just keep this, and I think this will be the theme this afternoon, we're not going to keep it just bounded to some of the traditional senses that you may be aware of when it comes to media. You know, for us, when we're talking with our students, our teachers, with our community, we have to take the entire spectrum of media into account. We're certainly going to talk about AI because that adds a whole new dimension. Data literacy, helping our students and quite frankly our community as well to understand the extraordinarily complicated information that is coming to them from multiple sources. Cybersecurity is another type of literacy, right? If you think about the explosion of cyber threats over the years, that's another digital type literacy, another new literacy that we need to make sure that we are preparing our students for. So I always struggle with trying to come up with an image for this, and I think this gets us close, you know, the idea of drinking through a fire hose, but I don't think it necessarily goes far enough. Certainly with the enormous amount of data that's coming at us, something to appreciate about that is it's not just more data, but it's different kinds of information with different types of quality attached to that information. Some very high quality, some low quality, some is user generated, some is scientifically vetted, right? It's overwhelming truly in both its pace and its volume. And this is challenging for young kids that are still developing critical thinking skills, right? Again, comparing back to education of 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, it's a lot easier to develop critical thinking when you are narrowly focused on just a few sources of information. Now we have this constant fire hose that's coming at us all the time. All right, so how do we try to grapple with this massive, massive topic? Well, I would like to offer up reason 127 that we love our libraries. The Pennsylvania School Library Association has been thinking about these types of problems now for several decades. And they have at least twice updated their model curriculum for what information literacy should be looking like for students, K through 12 students, in modern times. And I think what's interesting about this is that our librarians keep rescuing us because they are thinking deeply about the deep questions and not necessarily just being focused on the latest technologies of the day. And if you look at, I've tried to highlight some of the check marks here. Some of these questions and some of these critical skills that you're seeing, they are almost timeless, and they will survive no matter what happens with digital technology in the future. We want to make sure that students are reading widely, right? Not just getting information from one source, but from multiple. We want to make sure that our students are reading from diverse perspectives. You know, not just one or two authors, but let's get a whole body of knowledge around any given topic. We want them to be inquisitive and curious. At Penn Manor, it looks something like this. We've been working on this for a number of years, as you might imagine. We have age-appropriate, level-appropriate instruction when it comes to media, when it comes to data and information. In our elementary schools, the topics often revolve around this concept of digital citizenship. That's not only how you should, essentially what's appropriate, how do you behave online, how do you present yourself, how do you be a good citizen when you're communicating with others online. We begin at an early age, again, age appropriate, to talk about source evaluation, you know, helping the youngest kids, the youngest students to start to understand, is this a high quality source, is this a low quality source, and how do you figure that out? That'll find its way into research projects. Oftentimes, a lot of this instruction you'll find with our library curriculum. You know, really our librarians are at the forefront of this to introduce the topics and then support our classroom teachers. Again, age-appropriate, sort of scaffolding and building complexity over time as students get older. At the middle level, especially this past year, we have started to integrate more discussion around AI. I'm sure many, many of you have played with the latest Gen AI models, and you realize they can produce some pretty, at the surface, impressive-looking writing. Stealing an AI to do your homework, right? You know, just have the computer do your homework for you, that sort of thing, right? So we have to start having those conversations earlier and earlier with our kids. And that's important, right? Because we were just talking a little bit ago in the academic world, right? You don't want to misrepresent your words as someone else, right? Vitally important. We start to introduce concepts of authors and their bias. You know, we all have our biases. You know, we try to minimize them to make good decisions, but that's challenging, right? Any piece of media you look at is going to have either a major or subtle bias in it. We're humans, we do that, right? We are not robots. And obviously, we build on that as our students move up through the grades, scaffolding over time to try to address these new literacies. So what's a tip for this? If we were having this conversation, where would we start? And this applies to both students, and this applies to all the adults in the room as well. Slow down. Slow your roll, Go slow. We have this tendency anymore, and some of it is a product of the tools that we use, to read fast, move fast. I want to read this, I'm going to scroll, I'm going to keep scrolling. Oh, I'm going to open another tab, I'm going to jump, and now there's 5 things here, and my phone's going off, and I got my tablet, and there's an email, and I have 20 emails, right? Fast, 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 fast. We have to slow down. We have to slow down. That is the first step to get us into a different mode of thinking, to be able to more thoughtfully critique the media that's coming at us. This is not a psychology class, but this is biology-based. It's 2 sections of the brain. There's the critical thinking portion of our brain, which is up here in the prefrontal cortex. That's totally engaged for all of us right now. We're slowing down, we're thinking, we're evaluating, you're hearing what I'm saying, and you're thinking, oh, okay, I can get that, right? Conscientious thought. Much of our media triggers the emotional side of our brains. It's like throwing a stick of dynamite at us constantly. I suspect that if we had a stick of dynamite here in the middle of the room, and I asked you to solve a calculus problem, you're not going to be thinking about the calculus problem, right? You're going to be thinking about, am I going to get blown up with everybody else in the room? Social media is like that. It is tying into that emotional part of our brain. Case in point, take 2 seconds and take a look at these different responses between TikTok and Google. Pausing dramatically. Can't read the one on the right? Okay, here we go. Google. So COVID vaccine is the search term for Google. COVID vaccine for Google. Walk-in COVID vaccine. Which vaccine is best? Types of COVID vaccines. Walgreens COVID vaccines. On the left, TikTok. COVID vaccine injury. Truths. COVID vaccine exposed. HIV, warning. There's a bias here. There's a bias. Not a value judgment, but the tools themselves have a bias here. TikTok wants you to keep scrolling, so you keep seeing more ads. It's part of the attention economy. So how do you diffuse some of this? It's a trick called lateral reading, right? Open up another browser tab, but go interrogate the source. Look at the source of that information. Don't just take TikTok search results for it. Go lateral, right? Instead of going deep, go lateral and start interrogating other sources. Sometimes it's easy to spot these things, right? We can usually find satire pretty easily. That often gets really, really, really difficult when AI is amped up. This is an actual recent case where there was an Australian radio station that had a DJ. She happened to be completely AI generated, and she was people didn't know for 6 months. So it's very, very challenging to do this. What's the tip? Slow your roll, slow down, interrogate the source, think laterally. Don't just necessarily believe the first thing that you see. And I think I'm out of time. Hopefully, Stacey, that gets you going. So, all right. Thank you all. All right. There we are. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thanks for being here. So I'm going to start with just a couple of orienting quotes that mean something to me. The first is, media literacy empowers people to be critical thinkers and makers, effective communicators, and active citizens. And at the bottom there, you'll notice I have the source, namely, and I'll talk about them in a minute. Another piece of advice they have on their website I really like is the ability to assess, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using all forms of communication. Again, from Namely. So who's Namely? So they're the National Association for Media Literacy Education. They unite a community of educators committed to advancing media literacy education. So I kind of think, why reinvent the wheel? I really like Namely. They do a lot of great work, and I use them quite a bit in my coursework and in my research. So one of the things they do suggest is some tools. And access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act are these tools. Locate, retrieve, and use your media. How do you do that? How do you analyze it, examine it, and understand not only that it's there, but how it was made? Evaluate by assessing credibility, accuracy, and relevance. Create, which means producing responsible and ethical content. And finally, making informed decisions, acting at the end. So I'm going to go through a bit of a case study about this with some of my students in a course I teach called COM 220, Survey of Media. So it's a lower level required course for some students, elective for other students, and general education course, because in higher ed, we like to pile it all on. So it's a media literacy focus on accessing, analyzing, and acting and evaluating, as well as studying the topic area that is media history. So usually every week or every class period, there's a different kind of media. So in a book I wrote, I used some prompts from the book. At the end of the first chapter, in an area I call things to consider, I asked students to consider keeping a log of their media use for 1 week, writing the way they consume, which is the platform they use, the time that they're in with the media, the kinds of media they use, and so on. And so I do that every semester when I teach this class. It's been very interesting, and that's really what I'd like to share with you today. I think making it personal with students, I find they're often jaded, and so that I have to kind of open up a little bit with them and get them really thinking about their day-to-day lives. And so I use this across the top. You can see the different areas. And students have created spreadsheets. They can download that. I have tables they can use. Sometimes they just print it out, take a picture of it, and turn it in, and they use a pen and write on it. It really doesn't, I don't care how they turn it into me. But it's about time. And in the time area, I have by quarter hour, which might seem odd, but when you're using media, quarter hour probably is still too long in some cases. What media they're using, where they're using the media, how many media are they using at one time, what devices. And I think device is pretty important, because I'm of the philosophy that technology is not neutral. It has positive and negative effects, and it can have positive and negative effects immediately. Like, you can be very happy and the endorphins are going through your brain because of your headphones on, but you don't see the car and you get hit by a car. So that's positive and negative effects almost immediately on top of each other. And then are you watching the media with other people, or are you alone in the process? So these are what some of the students have said here. They're using media. This one student used media in bed, in class, at home. Usually it's one form of media, but their phone, their TV, their laptop are being used. They're looking at social media, and what I thought really interesting is they don't often say what kind of media. Some of them do, you'll see, but not this person. They were using their device and their media and social media, school, sports highlights, social media. And the sports highlights and social media, they're using 3 kinds of media, or 2 or 3, and they're doing it around 4 other people, which I thought was interesting. And then there's also a podcast there. Another student's kind of example by the quarter hour shows the different media they're using. They use a phone, laptop, iPad, Hulu, Instagram. I think it's interesting. They just say the app. They're not saying the programming, so I don't know what they're watching on Hulu, but nobody is really talking about the programming, but they're talking about what app they're using, and whether they're by themselves or someone else, again, in this case as well. But this person I think is interesting. They're listening to Spotify, and they're using Fresco, which is a creation tool. So that is, there's certainly creative spaces going on in the usage in their 1 week of media use. And then here's another one. It kind of gives you some examples. Phone, computer, computer, phone, FaceTime, FaceTime while they're doing the New York Games app, which I thought was interesting. Maybe they're playing it together, I'm not sure. Banking software, what? It's Wordle. Wordle, yes, there you go. Banking software, Twitter, Pinterest, lots of different kinds of things. And also, they're mostly by themselves in this one. So that level for me is a bit about the access. Students share what they use. But let's go into part 2. So I also asked them to do a discussion board after they're done with their 1 week. And I'm going to read some of these to you. My usage of media was not too surprising to me, as I feel like I frequently had something on in the background, whether I'm in my room playing video games, doing homework, or even showering. I did find it interesting of how often I use media, as each block was seemingly filled by something, whether I was listening to music at the gym or watching something while cleaning, except for when I was sleeping. Another student 2, reflects, media really takes over my life from the looks of it. I'm mostly reliant on Spotify, TikTok, and my PS5 for my entertainment. I think my life would be more boring. I mean, literally everything is media at this point. So by sitting around doing basically nothing would suck. And that made me think about my childhood a bit. What was I doing all that time I didn't have media? It surprised me just how much I actually use media and how fast time goes by using it. It doesn't feel like I spend hours listening to music or playing games until you sit down and measure it. And then the third one, I didn't use media the way I thought I did. I spent far more time browsing social media than I would have assumed previously, and consume much more content than I'd ever realized. I did know that I get a lot of news from social media, but I didn't realize that it's my primary source of news at times. So that kind of hits a little bit on the analyze and act portions that Namely suggests. And then the third part is I asked them to reflect back on somebody else's reflection. And there's 3 things I want to share with this. They're all really good, so coming up with 3 was very difficult. One student says, I've noticed the same thing in my list, my media usage getting higher mostly in the morning and at night. And then I noticed a similar trend where I was on social media more towards the morning, and my evening usually deviated towards gaming. I find myself relying on 2 or 3 sources at a time. And then my third one, I relate a lot to what you said about listening to music, and I also agree that I think we do underestimate how much we use media. I think some of us are embarrassed to be in media a lot. In reality, our whole world is full of media, and it's almost impossible to avoid. So finishing up here, I grayed out the evaluate because I don't think we're fully there, but it does scratch the surface. And it does use 3 and about half of Namely's ideas in just 1 week of a media log. I think the one that's missing here is creating and producing responsible and ethical content, which I think is worth a whole other assignment. As I close here, I want to share a couple ways that you can get more involved. Media Literacy Week. Screen-free week, which doesn't have a specific week. You choose when you want to do that with your family or with your organization or company. Use UNESCO's MIL Clicks activities. They're created for a global audience. And I invite you to track your media use for a week. So this is the book most of my information has come from today. Thank you.
That way, okay. So I come from, as Leah said, a bit of a journalism background, but I'm also an academic. So I practice journalism, but I also study journalism and teach about it. And one of the questions that's been driving me nuts is this one: why don't the public trust the media? So I want to talk today in my short remarks just some basis, like some criticism of media as media. Talk about some of the different political angles, the different ways that criticisms of media are framed, and then a little bit about media literacy and some of the things that I talk to my students about. So I want to reframe this question, like, why don't people or what do the media need to do to get back the trust of the public? And ask a different question, why are the media constantly vilified? Right? I want to turn this back around, because a lot of the complaints about media, a lot of the criticisms of media come down to, well, there's all this gotcha journalism. And when someone says that, I think, yeah, you did something wrong and they gotcha. Yeah, that's the way it works, buddy. You know, so some of this public trust, I think, is not warranted, or public mistrust, I think, is not warranted. I think it comes down to political angles, political vilification of journalists who are doing their jobs, uncovering things that politicians and corporations and individuals do that are bad, bringing light to it. And then those people, instead of saying, yeah, I did something wrong, mea culpa, they say, these evil journalists are out to get me. Okay, so, there we go. So, I'm turning it around and quoting Dale Gribble from King of the Hill. I blame the media blamers for why we have all of this mistrust in the media. I blame the media blamers. Not to say that journalism is without its faults, which I'm going to get to some of them in a minute here, but a lot of this comes down to, I don't know if, well, I'm sure some of you are old enough to remember the 1992 presidential campaign election and the bumper stickers, annoy the media, re-elect Bush. Right, like the sort of vilification of journalism in that way. The other aspect of this is that we are all, like with Charlie's fire hose, we are all inundated. So Arthur Lupia, in his excellent book Uninformed, says there are only two kinds of people: people who know they don't know enough, and people who delude themselves into thinking that they do. There's no third group. There are only those of us who realize we don't know enough, and those of us who are deluding ourselves. So that's a big part of the problem, is that we're inundated, we're overwhelmed. One of the big arguments that I try to put across to my students is that the word media is a plural word. The singular is medium. And so a lot of times that sort of media blamer kind of discourse, the vilification of news, the vilification of media, comes from this place where we use the word media as a singular. And we speak about them as if they are a sort of single globular mass, that just like a blob that's rolling across our brains. Media are a multitude. There are a multitude of technologies to start, and if you're a person who read McLuhan like I did, that affects the way you think about that. The technologies work in different ways. We can think about the Kennedy-Nixon, the story of whether it's apocryphal. I think the sort of larger point of it stands that people who watched the debate on television said Kennedy won, and people who listened on the radio said Nixon won, right? The way the medium delivers the message affects the way that you interpret it. The technology, the medium is the message, right? So it's a multitude of technologies. It's a multitude of institutions. Government is part of it. Corporations are part of it. Individual organizations, nonprofit groups are part of it. So it's institutions. The corporate interest in and of itself should be a separate category, a separate way of thinking about it. We're just seeing stories right now about Sherry Redstone placing influence over 60 Minutes because they're trying to get a merger approved, and they don't want to upset the gentle sensibilities of the man in the White House and hurt his feelings too badly. So let's not upset him until after the merger, right? So the corporate interests that are involved there, and then the individuals within all of these institutions who are at odds with one another at times, who are pushing in opposite directions. All of those individuals have individual interests. The reporter goes out and observes the world and takes notes and then edits those notes down to 400 or 500 words and sends it to the editor, who turns it into 300 words, right? A very long story about a woman who burned herself with McDonald's coffee gets narrowed down to 3 sentences, and everyone is outraged about how overly litigious we are, when the reality is something quite different, right? Because of the editorial process, and then the various types of content, and the way that that content delivers the message to us. Even the difference between a TikTok video and a YouTube video. They're both on the internet, they're both on platforms, they are not the same thing. They do not function in the same way, they're not created in the same way, they don't get delivered in the same way. So some of the media criticisms, how am I on time? Good, okay. So from the left, establishment biases is one criticism, that ads are for bougie people. Therefore, the news media will reflect the interests of bougie people. When you watch the news, look at what products are advertised. That tells you something about the audience. If the ads that you see are for high-end automobiles, you can probably guess that the news of that program is not going to be that concerned with the interests of the working class, right? Because that's not who's watching the program. So there's that's the left critique. The right will look at that same content and say, well, these coastal elites are just looking down their nose at you because, you know, you don't like gay people enough for whatever reason, right? And I think that a lot of times that coastal elites term is kind of just code for Jewish, if I'm being honest. But from the left, corporate ownership as a bias that places influence on media, being aware of what's the corporation that owns this outlet and how might that influence the outcomes of the report. Whereas on the right, it's, well, all the reporters are just liberal. Right? Now, both of those things can be true. I think probably a lot or most journalists on political issues lean more liberal culturally, but that doesn't mean that their content necessarily does. That doesn't mean that they're not doing a good job of trying to own their own biases and give honest reporting. So the corporate ownership and the corporate influence is what the left sees. The individual reporter having a political belief is what the right sees. And then the fake news and conspiracy theory, that's more prominent on the right now, but I can see that coming from both directions depending on the era in which we're examining. But it's more prominent from the left now. Past criticisms, the access theory, which is an older one, but I think it still holds. Very simply put, that freedom of the press only exists for the people who have the money to own the press. Right, that's Jerome Barron's argument. And so for freedom of speech, for freedom of the press to actually mean something beyond the paper that it's written on, we need to increase access beyond just the very wealthiest members of society. So right now on paper, everybody in this room has freedom of the press, but Rupert Murdoch has freedom of the press. Right, like he has a little bit more than the rest of us. And then I think there is a fair criticism of both sidesism, that the job of the journalist, I tell my students, if somebody says it's raining outside and I'm writing an article about it and the other guy says it's not raining outside, my job is not to say, well, Charlie says it's raining and Stacey says it isn't. You decide. My job is to look out the damn window and check. Right, to see, and then to tell you. Charlie says it's raining, Stacey says it isn't, I looked out the window, it isn't. Just so you know, one side is wrong, and sometimes that happens. Oh, shoot, 1 minute. Okay, so Stacey covered Sonia Livingstone pretty well. I'll wrap up with Joshua Meyerowitz and his different versions of media literacy, because I think that's important stuff, and that's what I talk to my students about. Media grammar literacy. When you watch media content, knowing the grammar of that medium. So Meyerowitz gives us these different ways of thinking about it. The one that I talk to my students about when I talk about media grammar literacy, I tell them, go back and watch a TV show from the 1950s and just count in your head how long it takes for the image on the screen to change. Just give a count, and then watch a show from 2025 and give a count in your head for how long it takes for the image. You probably won't get to 1 in your count. And a TV show in the 1950s, you got to keep the camera on Lucy for a long time while she throws all those chocolates in her mouth, right? Otherwise, you miss the joke. Media content literacy, being able to understand and critique the content, knowing what's good and what's bad, and being able to give rationalization for it. And then medium literacy, being able to understand how the medium itself actually functions and what it does to us. Like understanding the phone, not the content that you're getting from it, but how that phone changes the way that you get information, and that being the more important thing. And with that, I'll skip Mike Caulfield, and if anybody wants to ask me about Mike Caulfield in the Q&A, that's cool, but I'll wrap up with George Gerbner, because he gets to what I'm talking about with medium literacy there. And when you look at Gerbner's model of communication, he reminds us of how much filtering everything goes through before it gets to our ears and eyeballs. And it's different from the way that it was when he made that model, but the model is still useful for us. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all so much for sticking to my strict times. I figured this is a very rich topic and one that you all will have a lot of questions about. So I want to invite all of our panelists to just grab a microphone. I'm going to kick us off with a couple of questions that I have, and I'd invite you all to answer, and then I'll come around as usual to audience questions. At the Hourglass here, we're obviously focused really specifically on Lancaster County, and so it's great to hear from, how these conversations are happening within Lancaster County schools. Do you see any specific situations in Lancaster where talking about media literacy has been really important lately? Awesome. Thanks, Charlie.
Testing, testing. Can you hear me now? I think two examples of that. I want to be sensitive to the fact that there's students involved in a local school that recently had a massive issue with deepfakes. If you're not familiar, deepfakes it's sort of an umbrella term for this technology that allows you to take a picture just the top of my head and put it on the body of, I don't know, who should I become? I don't know, somebody famous. Keith Richards, Charlie Brown, I don't know, something like that, right? So this technology's been around for a while in photographic mode, but it's evolved greatly over the past couple years with Gen AI and other tools, where now if you want, you can put my head on the body of Keith Richards, and now you have video of Charlie as Keith Richards playing at a Rolling Stones concert, right? So a local school district had students that took that technology, and instead of being playful with it, they were using it to take the heads of students, of young women, and place them on models. I'll leave it at that. Certainly not a Keith Richards style model, and quickly found themselves into felony territory because of that technology. So I think that's one of the challenges that we face, getting ahead of students, to getting in front of them, to make them understand that, okay, you may have some power and control over this media, but you need to understand this from an ethical, a moral context. You need to understand this from a data context and just human context of the power that you may have in your hands to harm other students. I think that's a powerful example of helping students really come to terms with the critical thinking around what these tools can do. Very quickly, the other thing that we see a great deal of at Penn Manor, and I know this happens at many schools, is that if there is a situation in a school, suddenly everybody knows before a principal may know, right? So whether it be maybe a fight, an altercation, maybe the rumor of a fight, it didn't actually happen, but the rumor of a fight suddenly is spreading immediately, and we have a community in panic, right? So the rapidity of the ability to be able to transmit and use media to communicate is extremely alarming and concerning to us as well, because again, it's that fear element of the brain that takes over with our students and parents in the community, and I understand that. But you need to slow your roll a little bit and say, what actually happened? Is this real? Did a fight actually occur? Okay, a giant monster is not actually attacking the building, right? This was just a rumor. So.
One of the things I've become aware of recently is a cheating ability through something called Snap AI that's part of Snapchat. So if a group of students, I think this is how it works, has a discussion, a message discussion list with everybody in the class, and they're taking a test, somebody can snap the question, AI answers it, and it goes to the message board. So when other students are using it, if they perhaps have their, can obscure their vision, or it's a large class, that the entire class can kind of cheat together. So it's called Snap AI, and it's being used in high schools around Lancaster County for sure, because I heard a conversation about it, and then I pressed a little bit and learned about it. But I haven't actually done it, so that's my next thought, is that I want to see if I can cheat on something and see what happens.
It's remarkable. Yeah, it's remarkable how much energy students will put into avoiding the assignment, right? If they took that same amount of time and energy to actually do the assignment. Yeah, anyway, editor.
Yeah, I think everything, it's the same all over, beyond the specifics. A big one that sticks out in my mind is when I ask my students, where do you get your news? And they say, well, I get it on TikTok, or I get it from Instagram. And I say, no, you don't. That's a platform. You get your information from X, from this person, or that news organization, or that company, whatever it is. TikTok is a platform through which the information comes to you. You need to dig a little deeper, and just to be fair to the students, that goes up to adulthood as well. A friend of my mom's, during the 2020 election, posted an article on Facebook that said, a dead body was found in a lake in Ukraine, and Hunter Biden put it there. And I said, okay, I'll bite. I went and I read the article, and I went to the website, and I clicked on the About Us tab on the website, their About Us thing, and it took me to a page that said, this is not a real website, this is a joke website. We make articles that are designed to make fun of people who believe silly things. And my mom's friend posted saying, look at what this awful thing that Hunter Biden did. And I said to her very nicely, I was like, you gotta click through a little bit more and check on it. So it's not just the youngsters, yeah.
Yeah, and we fight with that too. There's this impression, and I don't know, there's this seductive power of these devices for students where whatever they see, read on a phone, on a tablet, on a laptop, it's gotta be real, right? Why would this lie to me? Right? It's like a seductive power, and they don't slow down and just think critically, about, again, bias or any of the things we're doing right now. Again, having these slow conversations, right? Engaging our prefrontal cortex and thinking, is that real?
On the opposite, really quickly, on the opposite side, one of my pet peeves is naive cynicism, right? Like we have so much in the opposite direction now, where the people look at a piece of information, they go, well, CNN said it, I don't believe it. Right? It doesn't matter what or Fox said it, I don't believe it. Or I don't believe anything the government says. But the government is telling you a hurricane is on its way and you need to move. Well, the government said it, they're liars. Right? Like that's not critical thinking also, right? Like we've lost that. We've misinterpreted cynicism to be critical thought.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question and then turn it over to audience questions. This is maybe just a selfish exploration of mine, but after hearing all of this stuff, it's really easy to feel really, I guess, cynical about all of this, how media is affecting people's critical thinking and students especially. Are there pockets of hope that you're seeing within education, maybe experiences or people fighting against those kind of systems at play that you would want to share?
Very quickly, I think yes. I think there are small shoots of hope. What I'm hearing more and more, especially from high school students and also from at Millersville, I adjunct for just a couple classes throughout the year. I'm hearing more reflection, because a lot of what we're talking about here is getting students to be more reflective, to slow down, to start thinking about their thinking and what the media is doing to them. And I think that's starting to appear. I mean, what Stacey's doing with having her students keep a media journal is fantastic, right? Because for the first part of this is just getting them to raise awareness to how influential it is in their lives. But I'm starting to see students push back and say, like, I was shocked this calendar year, students saying, yeah, I realize what TikTok is doing to me. I just went through a detox. I'm not using TikTok anymore. I've stopped with Instagram. It's gotten too ridiculous. So I think our students are beginning to understand the impact that it's having. So yeah, I see rays of hope. Yeah, I don't think all is lost. These are, again, technology is not neutral. These technologies are wonderful. I mean, we never had the ability for every person in this room to potentially have a platform for good, right? To use those powers for good. So I don't want to throw out, the baby for the bathwater here. We're talking about a lot of the negatives. AI is remarkable. I mean, it's the next industrial revolution that we're living through. It's just having the critical thinking, the awareness of knowing what to do with it. That's a long answer, but I think there's hope with our kids. And I'm an optimist.
But I also think there's movements like touch grass, go outside, even if you're taking pictures with your phone. There's a lot of students that I see, they're the ones in school now, post-COVID students, post-pandemic students, will put the phone down. They have this joke, it's called the phone eats first, where everybody takes a picture of their dinner, but then they put their phones away for the rest of the time, but then they still have their content for later on, but throughout dinner, they're not going to use their content. So I think right now, these young people that are in my classroom now are starting to become cognizant. Some reasons are they go back home over holiday breaks, and they see that as one student said this morning, their younger siblings are running rampant with whatever media they're interested in, and I had rules when I had media. So it's like the older sibling worry, but I think that they're becoming smarter. I really do.
I think that there's a lot of bad content and media out there, but there's also like some of the best that we've ever had. I think there's some of the finest journalism in the world happening right now. ProPublica is a great source, The Atlantic, a lot of independent people. I feel like I have an embarrassment of riches of good content to consume every day of my life. Every time I'm doing something, I have an audiobook on or a podcast on while I'm cleaning the kitchen or working out. There's so much good stuff out there, you just need to find it. And the ability to access it through this magical device. I mean, I ask a robot to play any song in the world for me, and it does it. I just say, hey, robot, play Led Zeppelin 4, and it happens. Like, we're living in the future. It's magical. So.
Thank you for that. I'm going to open up to audience questions. We have time for a couple questions. Okay. And I'll just remind you also, our live stream folks can hear. I'll actually come to with the microphone.
Isn't this whole issue that people just don't, when you were talking about going too fast, they don't slow down anytime, anywhere. They're just used to living their life in the left lane. I'm an attorney. I charge for my time by the minute. I will try and talk to them, and they're walking away from me while I'm giving them the information they need for their case. I wind up repeating it 3 times. After about the first month or 2 of this, they pay for 3 times. It's like wasting money. They're just so used to not getting out of the left lane for any time, any reason.
Well, I think faculty can learn from lawyers. We should start charging for every time we have to explain something to our students, because I have the same problem. It's the last week of the semester, and I'm still telling them, don't forget your outline that I've been saying for 15 weeks. So, yeah.
I think, some of us may be in the last generation that knew what it was like before we had 24/7, 365 information. Our brain, we are not biologically wired for this at all. We are not. For tens of thousands of years, essentially our entire evolutionary scale has been we're walking around outside solving problems in groups. Really, that's really the history of humanity. So now, and that's time, right? So now here we are in just the past few decades, suddenly we have constant information all the time, super fast. Our brains are not wired for this. Have a conversation like this, the fact that many of you, I think all of you, have had like intense attention for the past 45 minutes, 50 minutes, this is a rarity that we should cherish. So I don't know, I don't have an answer for that. All I know is that biologically, this is tough for humans to deal with.
I'm a career broadcaster, and I worked at ABC News in New York for most of my career. And I can tell you that in the newsroom, it was absolutely discouraged that anyone talk politics. That was not allowed. So it took me years to find out where some of my colleagues stood in terms of politics. But given the fact that we have such cynicism toward the media today, to the point where some of our elected officials here in Lancaster will not speak to the media, saying that they will not be quoted correctly. What can be done about this to begin to change these attitudes?
What do we do in the rest of the afternoon? We can start working on it. This is a tough problem. Sorry, go ahead, Stacey.
No, it's so true. One of the things that keeps me going as somebody who teaches television production and broadcasting and journalism and news writing is having students do it right, so that when they leave my classroom, they know what they're doing, and they're able to have journalistic integrity and have ethics in their journalism. I don't know this is a question that we can answer when there's citizens journalists that just do whatever, but then there's also citizen journalists that really are thoughtful about the content they're putting out. There's just so much out there. I'm hoping that when my students go out into the world, and they do good journalism and they do good media work, that will get noticed and people will start paying attention to them because they will have done good work. But I think that's where it comes from. It's adjusting to this new kind of media landscape and then learning to do good ethical work.
Not to try to be simplistic, but I truly believe with every fiber in my being that the answer to this is education. I don't think there's another way out of this, and I think that the most important thing that we can be doing, in K-12 and certainly in post-secondary education, is to help our students think critically and slow down and think critically. I don't know another way out of this. That is a tall order I get. Hopefully we're making a dent in that. I hope you're making a dent in that as well, but I don't have another answer. I'm sorry. No silver bullets today outside of critical thinking and education.
Well, one of our two major political parties is unhealthy right now. It's just unhealthy. It's just, I know that makes me sound biased right now, like that would be what people will say, oh, you're just biased. I don't think that's the case. And I think that is a product of the media environment of that political party. I think it starts with, this isn't the end-all be-all only explanation, but it starts with getting rid of the fairness doctrine and the increase of highly partisan media that happened as a result of doing away with the fairness doctrine. It starts with Rush Limbaugh. It's there with Fox News. And I'll point you to a study where the researchers, Brockman and Calla, paid people who were regular viewers of Fox $15 an hour to watch only CNN for a month. And the study found a noticeable impact on the viewers' attitudes and beliefs. Participants became more likely to believe that Fox wouldn't cover Trump's mistakes and more supportive of vote by mail, for example. And it is the creation of, it's what I started my talk with. It's this creation of cynicism. Frank Luntz is a conservative political consultant who the radio show This American Life did a story with him where he just could not wrap his head around why so many people were so unwilling to take the vaccine, the COVID vaccine. He just was flabbergasted. Why won't they trust this? And so he had Chris Christie come on and talk to these people. And Chris Christie said, look, I'm friends with, at the time, I'm friends with President Trump. I was in the White House. Hope Hicks got sick. She's a young, healthy person. She got sick. I got sick. The president got sick. I took the vaccine. You got to get, and right when Christie had them on this program, right when he had them sort of like open to maybe taking the vaccine, these people in his focus group, he wrapped it all up by saying to them, and well, every time us politicians get involved in something, we screw it up. And she said, well, you got that right. And I thought, well, you are so lacking in self-awareness that you just solved your problem and then shot yourself in the foot immediately after. It's this political cynicism that has been building and building over the entirety of my adult life, starting from my first vote as an adult when I was 18 in 1996 to today. This very slow, gradual building of ugly, ugly cynicism that I would argue starts with Rush Limbaugh and gets us to Alex Jones.
Thanks, Rob. I'm just going to stop us here because we only have a couple minutes left. And just as a reminder, Hourglass remains a nonpartisan space, so hopefully, our conversation can remain focused. Yeah, and we have one final question.
The underlying theme is critical thinking. What tools do you use to assess the progress you're making with students and the ability to think critically? You may know that many companies assess executives, either new hires or existing ones, because they think critical thinking is so important. One of the most widely used assessments is from Watson Glaser. So my question to you: how do you gauge how the improvement you're making?
Yeah, really quickly, K through 12 PSSAs have been aligning around this for a number of years. There's been a shift to more nonfiction texts. Not that we don't like fiction, right? But introducing more nonfiction to students, right, to start to develop those skills. That's two fast replies to that. Go ahead, Stacey.
Every program at Millersville goes through an assessment program. Rob's in charge of the one in my department. We go through classes. We assess critical thinking. It's part of one of our student learning outcomes in our programs. I think that goes across the whole, at least at Millersville, but I go to national conferences and everybody's always talking about assessing critical thinking. So, I mean, it's kind of a squishy term, right? Because what really is critically thinking, and how do you judge when somebody goes from here to there in their understanding? But if you're working with students and they're assessing the work over years and then closing the loop and fixing things and reassessing, you do feel fairly confident that students are learning critical thinking. Now, learning it in college and using it when they graduate are two different things, though, right?
It's, and I'll add on just the classroom in and of itself, just the conversation, the openness of the conversation, getting them engaged, getting them practicing, creating media, because I feel like as a student, I became a better consumer of media when I learned how to make media. So that's why with Sonia Livingstone's access analysis, evaluation, and content creation, as Stacey added, that's a really important part of it. I learned a lot about how to be a news consumer by taking classes and learning how to be a maker of news, how to write and create video and tell stories.
All right, I want to thank all of our speakers again for being here today. Charlie, Stacey, Robert, another round of applause. A video recording of this forum will be available sometime next week. If you aren't subscribed to our newsletter, I would invite you to do so. You can sign up to be a member of the Hourglass at our website as well. In June, we'll be hearing from the mayor. This will be one of Mayor Sirachi's last times presenting for the Hourglass, so we hope that you'll join. Please invite a friend to come with you if you'd like. Thank you all so much for being here, and have a great Friday.